Hello, welcome everyone to Threads Conference. We're very, very happy to have you today with us, and it's certainly my pleasure and honor to interview Madam Adrienne Clarkson today. It is a pleasure to be with you today and to talk to you. I wanted to start with a question around citizenship. We obviously are living through times of unprecedented migration at this moment. How What do you see as the contributions of newcomers to Canadian society?
I think newcomers give everything to Canadian society. I think newcomers are the energy. I think they bring new ideas. I think they bring ambition. I think they push things. Um, I think that we are being a country of immigration. We really have to keep that up. I'm deeply concerned that now during COVID, we've let numbers go. I mean, everybody recognizes that. The government recognizes it. They aren't happy about it either. It's not like we suddenly decided we weren't going to have the numbers that we once had. But not only do we need the numbers we once had, we need to boost them. We need to boost them very, very much. And I think we can only gain from that. I think we have to have the knowledge that we have made a success of immigration in Canada in a way that perhaps no other country has, because we have been able to give people a platform when they come to Canada as potential citizens, as landed immigrants, knowing that they will become citizens within 3 to 5 years, knowing that we have that commitment to them as a country and that they commit to us. And when we have our citizenship ceremonies at the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, my foundation that my husband and I founded after we left Rideau Hall, I always thank people for choosing Canada, because I think in choosing Canada, they have said to themselves in some way, yes, we can do this. We can take the winter. We can, even if they didn't know what the winter was going to be like, and even if that ends up being the only thing they don't like about Canada, and it is usually the only thing they don't like, uh, we can take the winter. We can contribute, and Canada has always been very open since about the Second World War to that. We have had a dreadful history in many ways. We're no different from many other countries. We have human beings in our country, the way other countries do, with all their prejudices and their preconceptions, and we had laws that prohibited Chinese from coming to Canada. We when I have a photocopy of a page in the Chinese Exclusion Act of my arrival here. I was put in a book, and a PhD student at UBC photocopied it for me because they were doing studies on Chinese Exclusion Act. And there I am, age 9. I mean, they took a while because I'd been here already for 6 years, but I was already registered as a Chinese person. You had to be registered. But we never paid the head tax, as far as I know, because I'm sure my father would have mentioned that. And we certainly knew that there had been tremendous prejudice. And the worst stain is that during the Second World War, against a people all at once was against the Japanese, and making them lose everything that they owned, people who had been born in Canada 2 generations. We did awful things. And we continue to not do the right thing in many ways by our Indigenous people. And that is an area which I think newcomers can help with, because what I've noticed when I go to ceremonies and when I have discussions with new Canadians is half the time people say, well, what about Indians and Eskimos? That's what they used to always say. And now we've gotten them used to saying the Indigenous people, First Nations, or Inuit. What about them? And what about them and us? And I think that this is going to help us by having new people who come and say, hey, we realize that this country was not only populated by Scots and Irish, and then later by the second waves of Jews and Poles and Hungarians and Chinese and Japanese, Indians, and so on. But there were people here all the time before. And I think that gives a richness and a depth to a country, especially to everybody who comes from other countries, where there is a depth in their country of a history of who was there even before their particular tribe was there or their particular caste was there. And I think that's very important. I think people, underestimate what people who come to this country understand or pick up very quickly. Um, Coming as a refugee, I think, is even better in many ways. It sounds negative, but it isn't. Coming as a refugee means that you have had everything taken away from you. You have nothing. And when we came to this country, my parents and I and my brother, we came with one suitcase each on a Red Cross ship. That is kind of an extreme example, but the Syrians are the latest. And when I went out to welcome the first Syrian airplane that came in January of 2015. I took my grandchildren out, my husband and I and the grandchildren went out, and it was wonderful to see how Canada had organized welcoming the first load, and after that, many others, with a place where they could shop immediately. They didn't have to pay anything. It was set up like a shop, and they just ran around and got parkas and scarves and boots, and they weren't all the same color and they weren't all the same look. They had obviously gone and they were completely like going shopping, only it was for free. And they got all of that. They got their SIN numbers, they got their health cards, everything within 2 hours, and they were whisked off on buses to hotels. I was so proud of Canada to be able to do that. I don't think any other country can do that for refugees and understand that people want to get going right away. You don't keep them mired in paper and in identifying and defensiveness, etc. I have some experience with France because I went there as a student when I was 21. And I was treated as an enemy alien almost. When you go to France as a student, you have to register, or anybody who's going to live there has to register with the police, with this Homeland Security. And in Canada, you don't do that. In immigration, citizenship, refugees, etc., are under separate departments that look after them. In the European countries, they don't have a ministry of citizenship and immigration or refugees. They come under some kind of Homeland Security, which means the police look after them. So in everybody's mind, subconsciously, these people are alien. These people have to be controlled. These people are other. And in Canada, we don't do that. We don't realize how different we are, how lucky we are that we started that. And that's because we're a country that welcomed immigrants, that without immigrants couldn't have opened up the West, for instance. And I think it's really necessary for us to keep that up. We have to keep pushing on getting our refugees and transforming them into Canadians, because this is a very key point always. People are not the same people as they would have been had they stayed in the countries they came from. If you'd stayed in the country you came from, you would be a different kind of person, even if you'd made different choices. When you come to Canada, you are transformed, yes, by the weather, for one thing, by the geography, by the fact of the other people that you come in contact with who are not all like you or variations of you, your same color perhaps, but your enemy tribally or caste-wise or class-wise. You come to Canada and everybody's thrown into the same pot, and you have to adjust to that. I think what's interesting about being discombobulated and being thrown up in the air and coming down again is if you land on your feet, you come down running because you've come down running from where you've been thrown up. And I think that's what happens to many refugees. And people are curious in Canada. We don't have, luckily for us, we don't have a kind of story that says that we are the best that ever existed, that our system is the best, that everything about us is the best. And that helps a lot, I think, with welcoming refugees. We have to have them. We need them. If we don't have refugees as immigrants and more immigrants, and most of them will be refugees because 80 million people are moving around the world as refugees. If we don't have them, we won't be able to keep up our health care or our public education or anything after 2030, 35, because our birth rate here is not going to guarantee that. So there's self-interest, and there's also the interest of the world is at our gates. We have all kinds of possibilities to help people be better, have better opportunities, and all human beings are human. There isn't a single human being who is more human than anybody else. And we're all born with the same kind of motor systems, brains, etc. So why not? We are very, very happy to use all of that for our benefit in Canada.
You mentioned a bit earlier the institute that you co-founded with your husband, John Rustin Soul, the Institute for Canadian Citizenship. You also gave a few years ago a series of Massey lectures on belonging. Tell us a little bit what belonging is and why is belonging important in the context that we're operating in.
I think belonging is very important because it is the basis of all things like citizenship or the creation of nations and groups and people's ability to live together in a civilized manner, making room for each other, listening to each other. And belonging is the essential part of citizenship. It is a very important point, though, that belonging does not mean conformity. Belonging does not mean being the same. As belonging means that you are accepted for what you are. And the best example of that is any kind of family, a good family that functions well. A good family that functions well knows that everybody is different and you have to make allowances for things that are different in them. And that really citizenship and belonging and friendship is a very important thing. And I think that's part of the basis of the kind of welcoming that we have had in Canada, because we have a unique way of welcoming people, which is that citizen groups welcome refugees. They get together in churches or community centers, and 4 or 5 or 6 families look after one refugee family. And it takes that many people to look after one refugee family because they have all sorts of needs that are different when they come. And they have children, they have shopping to do, they have to get enrolled in schools. But I think the idea of belonging, we have pioneered this idea, which we did starting with the Vietnamese people in 1969. And I was part of that whole thing, that first Operation Lifeline, where the government said, we're going to bring 25,000 refugees, I think that was the number, in. And public opinion, having seen these people in boats, Vietnamese refugees in boats drowning, being attacked by pirates, said, no, we need to bring double that. And so the government said, well, if you will sponsor them and take care of them, then we will. And we ended up taking many, many more. And that was how we all first got going in terms of getting together in community centers. You used to, in 69, 70, you'd see flyers on people's windshields in a shopping mall. And it would be, we're meeting tonight at such and such a hall. Come, we're going to adopt a refugee family if you want to get involved. And that's how people did it. And that's typically Canadian. That's the best side of being Canada. And I guess it's because we've got these awful winters, and we know that, that some snowstorm can happen, and that somebody might come to our door and it's minus 20 and it's blowing out, and you have to take them in because you could be in the same position. And every time we have a huge snowstorm of any kind, you'll see a story on a front page of the Relaxed Vagina Leader Post or whatever of somebody who's on a farm who trots out and brings people into his farmhouse, leading them, 20 car loads of people in to his farmhouse. And that's typical of us. It's the way we live. And I guess climate has created us. But belonging is the part of citizenship that I think often people misunderstand. They think that it means, in certain countries, certainly in Europe, you could not become a German citizen unless you proved that you had German blood. So it was all about that kind of genetic inheritance. Canada is a country where everybody has come here except for the Indigenous people who were here always and who initially welcomed us and showed us the way into the country. We could never have penetrated the country without their canoes, without their know-how. There was no way to make roads. We didn't have really roads that were passable until the 1850s. That's very late. In the prairies, maybe there were roads because there weren't that many rocks and things, but in the eastern part of the country, we didn't do that, and we were lucky to be able to get and fortuitous that we got our railroad, which then bound us as a country. But if we hadn't had the native people to show us at the beginning how to use canoes to penetrate the waterways, we would never have been able to populate Canada at all. So that hardship, that kind of thing, makes us part of something that I think bonds us. And the bonding is that part of belonging. The Africans have the concept of Ubuntu, which is I belong because you belong. I am here because you are here. In other words, I'm not a solitary person who forges their way, come what may, through everything. I am somebody because you are something, and we are part of this together. And this Ubuntu, I wish we could introduce it more into people's concepts and thinkings, because it has to do with the humanity of people as they are. And perhaps it has to do originally with the fact that we all came out of Africa as people. A few years ago, I was in Ethiopia and I saw Lucy in the museum there. Lucy, who is the mother of us all, this little skeleton. And it was, truly moving to see this little thing, that human being from whom we all are descended. And when we think that the human race has descended out of the Rift Valley, out of Africa, and then out to the world, we think, well, we all are one, but we need to acknowledge that. And acknowledging that is by systems of government and concepts such as citizenship and doing your part as a citizen for other people, for yourself, exercising your rights as a citizen, to vote, to do things with other people, so that you get together in assemblies and you have the freedom to say to each other what you believe, and then create all of those systems that we have created together. If you don't belong, then you are really in kind of an outer darkness, and you believe, you understand that somehow you're not going to be part of things, and the people who are left out are the ones that we have to address ourselves to always. What we have to be certain about is that the people that we ask to come here, to work here, to help create our country here, we couldn't have our country without immigration, that we also do the right thing by them. And that means good public education, good public health, decent living standards. And I think COVID is revealing a lot that is pretty horrifying. The idea, for instance, that many people do not have paid sick leave and therefore are nervous about, saying that they don't feel well and go back to their job when they may be ill. The people don't have paid sick leave in a country like Canada, to me, is shocking. So these things that are being revealed in this time of terrible crisis, I hope will shock us all into saying, this can't go on. It's not like that. The way also the treatment of older people in retirement homes can't go on like that. We've got a nationwide scandal of that. And that's what the crisis has brought to us. It's a crisis that I think belonging really addresses, in the sense that either we all belong or there's no such thing as what we are as a group and as citizens. Omayra, you come from a country, Niger, where I was very fortunate to go in the 70s, a long time ago, when there was a drought in the Sahel. And So I went to Mali and I went to Niger, and I was so intrigued by the culture there. And also because uh, it's a former colonial country, and we are too. We were colonial to the French, and there were so many wonderful remnants of French colonialism that were colorful, like the Vietnamese restaurant run by the old French legionnaire in Niamey, and the beauty of the country. So, do you miss anything about that? And do you feel that you have brought from it for yourself, that you can keep within yourself, that's important? A country like Niger, not known very well to many people at all as an African country, but so rich in history and in its position in Africa.
Such an incredible question. Thank you for that. Um, I grew up in Niger, and I came here at the age of 16 to straight to Saskatoon. We didn't transition through other parts of the country, so I came here as mostly a French speaker, and had to learn English later in life, and went on to do studies in English literature at the university, as a way to capture that language, English, and be able to function. So I miss Niger very much. And I think about Niger every day. I still have a lot of family back there. And I think about, what it means to be a young woman from Niger who's also a Canadian citizen, and what I bring here in my new country. And I came to the conclusion that it really has to do with tolerance. We're a culture in Niger where there's a lot of diversity, a lot of different languages. And it's a country that historically has been very peaceful. And peace and tolerance is very, very important. I was raised with that, especially with my grandmother. And that's something that I carry with me. And I know that here in Canada, sometimes we have big, difficult conversations as a country. And to be able to listen to different perspectives is really, really important. And that's something that I carry with me. So thank you for that.
And your grandmother stayed in Niger when you all came. Oh, yeah, that's sad too often, because you lose that contact immediately. But you go back. So you
I
have.
go back. Yes, I went back 2 years ago, and I'm hoping to go back again when things will quiet down with COVID. I hope to be able to. She would be the first person I would travel to go see for sure.
Does she live in the capital?
Yes, she lives in Niamey. Yes, yeah, yeah.
And tell me about the position of the what are the Tuaregs up to at the moment? They are fascinating to me.
Yeah, the Tuaregs, they're fascinating to me as well. And I grew up in Tuareg territory, so in northern
Oh,
Niger,
did you?
in
Did
Agadez. Yes, and growing up there, of course, droughts were chronic for sure. The Tuaregs, after years of rebellion and different waves of rebellion against the state, have in many ways integrated the state institutions. And so there's a bit more peace than definitely when I was growing up in the 90s. Then so it's a country that is not perfect, but that's fighting to be in many ways closer to each other.
That's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Such a great pleasure to speak with you. And to know that you were in Niger in the 70s
Yeah.
just warms my heart in many ways. You were a journalist for decades, and a TV host as well at CBC, where I work myself. What's the power of storytelling and connecting us, and threading those cultural differences that we might have?
Well, I think they're very important, because every person is the hero or heroine of their own novel that they're writing. Everybody is creating a narrative. Everything is your story. and you connect with other people's stories. And then we like to read the stories of people we don't know and may never know, and people who've died long ago. The narrative is the most important thing in the humanistic life, the story. And people kept each other alive when they could barely speak, I think, by telling stories around the fire, and and expressing themselves to each other about what they thought and what they made up. And I think the narrative is so important in people's lives. It's just preeminent. And you can say it's not just about writing novels or poetry or even very good nonfiction, which has the creation of a narrative that you would not be able to do for yourself. I think it's very important for people to understand that and to give that its worth. And for people bringing up children to understand that children are writing their own lives right from the start, and that's not going to be your life or even the life of your family necessarily. It'll be different. It'll be their own life. Um, Very fortunate children will have parents who recognize that, that recognize that they give to their children the opportunity to go out and to say to the world, "Here I am." You know, that is really not something I think that a lot of people think about, but I think it's very, very important for women to have that, because often women are not put in that kind of position, or not told that that's what they can do, that the world is ready and waiting for them. I think if every child, if I could give every child a gift, it would be to say, you know, the world is waiting for you. You know, the world is waiting for you, and the world is waiting for you to say, do, be something, however it is, that is waiting for you, the individual. And that, I think, is very important. It comes through often through our teachers. And I think that's where we have great strength in Canada. I'm a great proponent of public education. I really believe that we can't have a successful immigrant nation without successful public and well-funded public education. Because when my parents came to this country, probably when yours, I don't know, but mine could not have afforded to pay for school for me. I went to the, 3 blocks down the road, it happened to be York Street School, kindergarten, where I was not a success, and where I just was not a success because I wanted to play the triangle and they wouldn't let me play the triangle. And I could already read when I was 4, which was interesting. And I was bored. So I went into grade 1. And from then on, my life was great because I loved my teachers. I loved school. And I think that I went to public high school, which was a great public high school, Lisgar Collegiate in Ottawa. I went to the University of Toronto, publicly funded universities. Yes, I paid something, etc., and I worked in summers, but I could get through. It was not a barrier to entry not to have money. And I think that we can't have our country have people come to it from all over the world without having great public education. And I am a little disturbed sometimes when I see immigrants who become very successful, and I see that they are putting their children in private schools. And I think, why are you doing that? And sometimes I ask them, sometimes I don't. But I think always, why would you do that? Why would you not put your children into good public schools so that they can meet everybody? That's the other thing I think was an advantage for me, was that I grew up in a smallish city, which was Ottawa. Then it was a small city, about 150,000 people. It's now 1 million. And there were only 6 public schools and 6 high schools. And so everybody kind of got to know each other because of the intercollegiate sports and all of that. And you mixed with everybody. You mixed with people who you just knew that, when you were invited there, maybe for Sunday dinner, that was probably the only meal they had that was chicken. I grew up in the 40s and 50s. Canada was not a rich country. Canada was a poor country, and people shared a lot. and that there were people who could not have a birthday party the way you had a birthday party. Um, they couldn't have a cake. There was all sorts of there was all that public school education in a smaller city, smaller town was very, very good because you mixed with all sorts of people. And then I think you stream out a little bit when you go to university because you have different choices, and um, and that's fine. But up till the age of 16 or 17, if I could make it obligatory, I would, that everybody has to go to public school. It is really, really important that people go to public school.
Let's talk a bit about Canadian pluralism. You talked about the importance of having diversity in public institutions like public schools. What's the state of Canadian pluralism today? And when you started your career, did you have a different concept of it? And has it changed at all for you?
Well, I grew up in a white town filled with white bread and white people. And I have to say that it was Ottawa, the capital of Canada, and it was during the war. Um, but there was not a single Black person in Canada, in Ottawa when I was growing up. I didn't see a single Black person in Ottawa. There were 6 or 7 Chinese families who were part of the old, what I call the old Chinese settlement, the old Chinese Canadians who were part of the building of the railroad, and they had we had 4 or 5 restaurants in Ottawa, and they were Chinese. And then there were 3 or 4 laundries. And these were the people who came out in the 19th century, were brought out practically as indentured laborers, practically as slaves, to build the railway, and then were dropped off all across the country where there was a railroad. And that's why there's a Chinese Canadian restaurant in places like Sudbury and Salmon Arm and so on, because they were dropped off one by one. So they were all alone, and then eventually they tried to come on their own, paying the head tax and so on. And but there were no Indians from South Asia, or there were no Indians. And when I was Governor General, I used to be driven sometimes around the end of school day back from an appointment or something, and I would see around Glebe Collegiate School bus station, where the kids were waiting for the bus, or at Lisgar, where I used to go to school. And I couldn't tell where I was in the world by looking at those kids because they were such a mixture. And I thought, in those years, since, in those 60, 55 years since I was a high school student, how that place had changed and how Canada has changed. So pluralism has been so important to Canada. It has been so necessary for us to be able to welcome the world and be part of the world. And it's a big advantage to have people from different parts of the world in your population because they know how things operate in those other places. And they're very sophisticated. They may not have any money when they come, and they may not have a CV that says Canada, Canada, and we went to this university and that, but they have a knowledge of things that are so important. One of the things I think is really critical is that it's not just about the food, although the food is really something. I know young people, a lot of young people. I remember even my nephew, even 30, 40 years ago, my nephew went for a trip to Europe, and he said, everywhere you go, he said, you just eat the food that's that food. I mean, he said, I couldn't get Chinese food in Spain. And, that's what we're all used to so much. We're used to living in a very, very polyglot world, a very cosmopolitan world. And that's what His Highness the Aga Khan says about the world, that it must develop the cosmopolitan ethic. And the cosmopolitan ethic is one which means that we know, we instinctively feel that other people have different things and that we would like to have access to them. We might not be able to learn the language or whatever, but we sure like butter chicken, and we like dim sum, and we like pizza, and all of that didn't exist before the 60s. We've made a great leap in the last 60 years in the way we've become what we've become. And the fact that in Toronto, 52% of the people in Toronto were not born in Canada. This is a very staggering fact, but they're all Canadian. You know, we're Canadians, and we have the ability to bring with us what we wanted to, and to leave what isn't good. Perhaps the groups that we didn't want to be part of, didn't want to be part of us, the old prejudices, the old concepts. And we have a chance in Canada to keep what we want. And I think that's usually done through the food. But we can let go the other things that kind of trapped us into the cultures that we, in many ways, have escaped. And I think when people have had to flee because they liked where they were, and that was our case. We left Hong Kong. We would never have left Hong Kong if we hadn't been conquered by the Japanese during the war. We liked where we were, and we had to adjust to new things. But what we adjusted to brought us a great deal of benefit. And it's often interesting to think of what your life would have been like had you not become Canadian, or if you'd stayed where you were. And so I asked my father, who died when he was 96, in the last year of his life, we never discussed it actually. I said, what do you think would have happened if there hadn't been a war and we'd stayed in Hong Kong? And what would have happened to me, for instance? You would have stayed being a very prominent businessman, doing extremely well. But what would have happened to me? And he said, oh, I know. He said, your mother and I, we would have sent you to the States. We would have sent you because a lot of people from their milieu went to places like their daughters went to Radcliffe or to Wellesley or to Vassar, to a women's university in the States. And then he said, because he had a huge sense of humor, I was only half kidding. He said, and then I think he would have married a rich stockbroker and lived on the Upper East Side in New York. And, he may not have been wrong. But certainly, if that had been the case, I would never have become Governor General of Canada or never aspired to the highest office of the land in the United States, because you have to be born there to do that.
So quite the opportunities to have come to Canada and have grown up here. One thing that strikes me about you is your love for arts. And the Threads conference will feature a lot of artists from different disciplines. What's the role of art in helping us thread together, in the same social fabric?
Oh, I think everything to do with arts and culture is the enriching part of our lives. It's what we do once our tummies are full and we have a roof over our heads and we know that we're okay. But even for artists themselves, they don't even care if they have their stomach full or a roof over their heads. They'll still be artists because they have to be. And that's what I do admire. I think that art and artists are just incredible. I was not brought up with a particular interest in the arts. My mother loved music, so we always, the moment we had any money, we would go to a concert. And then when I came to university in Toronto, I got a subscription to the Toronto Symphony, a student subscription, and music was always important in my family because my mother played the piano and we listened to records and so on. So music is a very primary thing, but the visual arts to me are very important and they have become very, very important to me. And architecture. My daughter's an architect, and I'm very proud of that. I would have been an architect if I could draw. Because I love looking at architecture, and it's just wonderful because she's fulfilled a dream that was unrealistic on my part. But I took a course when I did English language and literature at the University of Toronto, but for 3 years I did a fine arts course, which was then called Art and Archaeology. So you did the history of art from the beginning I took it up to the 18th century. So the idea of people building these cathedrals, for instance, and knowing when they started building a cathedral and they laid the stone, that they wouldn't see it finished, nor would their sons, nor would their grandsons, nor would their great-grandsons. It would take 250 years to finish a cathedral. The idea that this beauty and this creation would be something that that they were contributing to was ongoing. And that's what's so wonderful about art, because it's about beauty. It's about the creation of a certain vision of what the world is like through theater, through music, through the visual arts. I think I couldn't live without music and the visual arts at all. And I'm a great movie fan, because that's the form of the modern art that I particularly like. And I think that people who give themselves to being artists, whether it's performing artists or creative artists like writers or painters or sculptors or architects for that matter, are people who are in touch with something that is eternal, something that is not of the moment of, the French have an expression, métro, boulot, dodo, which means the subway, work and sleep. And that's not what life is about. Life is about the aspirations that artists show us through their poetry, through their art. And it's so important at this time to support the arts. They're going through a terrible, terrible time. So, when we had bought subscriptions for the year to things, I immediately said, we keep that money, even though we're not going to see anything, because you're going to need that. And I hope that people who have done subscriptions will do the same thing to keep things going and take up subscriptions for this coming year, even though I doubt very much whether we'll be able, even by the fall, to get together in any meaningful way in groups to see theater or music, or even go to museums. We'll have to see how we do with the vaccinations. But it is so important for the human spirit that we realize it puts us in touch with the eternal. It puts us in touch with something that is not the everyday thing. It also broadens our horizons to think beyond what we can conceive of. What is exciting about going to a new show in an art gallery or something is to see something through somebody else's eyes that has a vision that says, this is the way I see things, and you wouldn't have seen these colors that way or these forms that way unless I showed them to you. And I like that contact with that kind of ego. That's a very good kind of ego, and I think it's beautiful.
It's a great place to end. Thank you so much, Madam Clarkson. It's been a great pleasure to speak with you today.
I've enjoyed it so much, Omayra. Good luck.